Hello, I'm Peter Bouckaert of Purpose Brewing and Cellars, and this is the Brewer to Brewer podcast from All About Beer. My guest this time is Jeff Lebesch, the founder and former brewmaster or owner of New Belgium Brewing Co. And he's here for a conversation that goes beyond the brew house and into topics that matter to brewing professionals and curious beer drinkers. But first, please visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media at All About Beer. To support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. Wow, I'm not good in reading something, yeah? We'll get into the conversation in just a moment, but first this message.
Time to add a kick of color. Blue butterfly flower is a natural, flavorless flower that gives beers an attractive violet or amethyst hue. Contact First Tea to discover blue butterfly and other natural botanicals that deliver color, fragrance, and flavor. Email info@firsttea, that's FIRSDTEA.com to find out more. Malteurop Malting Company is based in North America, specializing in growing and producing quality malts for the craft beer and distilling industries. With local farms and malt houses spread across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, MMC's commitment to excellence is fully ingrained into every batch it produces, ensuring breweries and distilleries of any size can create the finest beverages on the planet. Visit malteuropmaltingco.com to learn how Malt Europe can support your malting needs. Or you can contact them at customer success at malteurope.com or call 844-546-MALT for questions or to place your order. Malt Europe, premium grains from field to flavor. Today's episode is sponsored by Stomp Stickers. Stomp is a proud member of the Brewers Association that produces a wide variety of printed brewery products, such as beer labels, keg collars, coasters, beer boxes, and much more. Stomp's website features an easy-to-use digital design tool, low-quantity orders, fast turnaround times, and free domestic shipping. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.
Okay, let's get into it. My I'm really honored to have Jeff Lebesch here as my guest. Jeff is started New Belgium, was the brewmaster before me, was the chief mechanic, whatever. A small brewery, he had to do it all when he started in New Belgium Brewing. And it became one of the largest American craft breweries. An electric engineer by training, Jeff's passion for beer inspired him to launch New Belgium out of a self-engineered basement brewery in 1991. Since retiring from the brewing business in 2009, he has pursued other passions of mountain biking, alpine trekking, ocean sailing. Wow. And most recently, he's written a book. This is a book here, Born on a Bike. It's a personal history of the origins of early years of brewing, of New Belgium Brewing Company. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you, Peter. Glad to be here.
I have a question. This book has been published by, what is it, Pataya Press? So what does that mean? If I want to order this book, how can I find this?
Oh, actually, it is being printed by Amazon, Amazon.com, all about beer. Amazon.com, Born on a Bike. That will be the place to buy this book, unless you're at one of New Belgium's breweries. They're carrying it here in Fort Collins.
Okay, so just go to Amazon and type in Born on a Bike seat and it should pop up.
Born on a Bike.
Born on a Bike, sorry.
Born on a Bike seat is a different video that one can find on the internet. That it was an interview that New Belgium did with me some years ago.
Mm-hmm. The first time I met you, I was still the brewmaster. I know we did like a private visit, maybe somewhere late in the afternoon. I don't know exactly the time, but I remember we ended up in that little private bar behind the meeting. We had to go to a meeting room to sit there. And I didn't really know anything about American brewing at that point. And I kind of thought it was odd that somebody was visiting Rodenbach and actually knew the beer. What do you remember about that?
That was a very fascinating visit. I had traveled first to Germany to visit the Brewing Equipment Trade Show, and then with a colleague from New Belgium, and then he was familiar with the Belgian. He's Belgian, and was familiar with the Belgian beer industry and had some connections. He said, "Hey, let's go do a tour of Belgian breweries." So, so we made the trip from Nuremberg to Belgium and toured around a bunch of stuff. And that it was such a juxtaposition from the glitzy, modern, ultra modern trade show of equipment in Germany to suddenly being thrust into the most artisanal of the Belgian breweries, usually smelling of wood and mold and having spiders hanging over the fermentation vessels and aging barrels.
Okay, stop it there.
Okay.
Yeah, I read the book, but also in your intro or your bio, I see biking, hiking, Pinto rally. Growing up in Belgium, Wisconsin, um, where did your interest in beer found its roots?
Well, I think my interest in beer, it's in part growing up in Wisconsin. I mean, Wisconsin is a big beer loving state, and my mother, grandmother, and ancestors on that side living coincidentally, not coincidentally, I think this is prophetic, living in Belgium, Wisconsin, a little village of all Luxembourg settlers.
There is something like that.
Yes. And I have a picture taken from the year before I was born of my mother and grandmother and several other relatives having a little summer party, and they're holding a glass of beer, a glass with foam on it, and they're not drinking from bottles or cans. And so I think this is not just a coincidence. It just sort of is in my roots. But after that, I was going to high school and university in St. Louis, Missouri, and kind of followed the standard beer drinking track, getting loaded at the frat parties on the weekends. But then I did have chance encounters with beer of flavor and realized there's a lot more to be learned here than just pounding Budweisers. Um, and that's about the time I started looking at other beers. And at the time, that was the late '70s, early '80s. Um, the only beers of flavor that were available then were imports, and so I was cruising the liquor stores looking for specialty imported beers and learning a lot about them.
But there were some other passions that I don't know if they are related, the biking, the hiking, and then I'm especially mentioned the Pinto Rally because that was a fascinating story for me.
Oh, the Pinto Rally. Well, that's a diversion that's not exactly related to beer, but I did have a passion for sports cars then and still now. And the Pinto was my mother's car that after about the junior year in college, I was allowed to take that to school. And I quickly transformed it into a rally car and with jacked up suspension and a bunch of driving lights and went ripping around the roads, gravel roads in Missouri and having good fun with that.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. I'm looking at the picture here from Belgium, Wisconsin, with your mother and some other ladies in their beer glasses. There's like a brewery or silos in the background. What is this here?
Yes, there are silos in the background. This was agrarian village and surrounded by farmland. It only had about 500 permanent residents there and a pretty large population of seasonal migrant workers that worked in the field. So those are agricultural silos in the back.
Okay, yeah. My first thought, of course, went to like fermenters that were in the background. I'm like, wow, there was even a brewery in Belgium, Wisconsin. Um, when I think about you, Jeff, I always see that if you get passionate about something, um, you really get deep into it. And so brewing is, of course, an example, but there's other examples that I've seen you doing the sailing from San Francisco to the solo sailing from San Francisco to the Hawaii. There's yeah, the if you touch something, you started with bread baking after you left New Belgium. It always goes very deep when you start on touching something. Is there something you would like to talk about?
You have really brought up that in a way that most people don't or don't notice, and it is totally true. I think it's part of my wiring that I can get deeply involved with hobbies and scientific things that are engineering things that are not don't involve human interactions, sadly, or for better or worse. That's kind of the place that I thrive. I do enjoy technological challenges, and when I find one, whether it's fermentation science in beer or sourdough bread or whatever the mechanics of making a boat cross an ocean by wind power only, or how to make a cheesy little four-cylinder Ford Pinto go fast on gravel roads. I like to go deep on things like that.
I think I saw the same also in brewing, and then I think in the book also it's really interesting how you start talking about um, from well, maybe we could also talk about the recipe creation of the beers, but then also in the later stage of building out the brewery. Uh, do you want to apply that to recipe creation?
Well, I think I want to start a little bit with let's talk about somewhat of my makeup, and I think making things is one of my passions. When whether building a car or building a brewery is making something, and I really that fits my personality quite well. And I guess that could segue into how does one build a beer recipe to make a beer that I wanted. Um, and it took a lot of work and going pretty deep to figure that out. And I first started homebrewing in 1980, very early in the time frame of American homebrewing. It was actually only 2 years after homebrewing was legalized in the United States. Um, the science or the knowledge base for homebrewing at that time was pretty thin, and we were all just sort of making stuff up using canned malt syrup and brown well-aged hops. um, and actually, that was fun and entertaining and kept us in cheap beer. Um, and through the 80s, the knowledge base for homebrewing advanced rapidly. And um, and likewise, my exposure to specialty beers, and somewhere in there maybe we'll get to it in a few minutes, exposure to Belgian beers in particular. And I wanted to see how can I make a beer that tastes as good as a Belgian beer at home. And so that took a lot of work and studying what different ingredients, how the different ingredients specifically impacted the outcome of the beer. And the biggest revelation during that time was the yeast. The yeast is really critical. I've been using packaged dry yeast up until that time. All the beers tasted the same. Some looked a little bit darker than others, but they really all tasted the same. And that was because of the yeast. And so I had to learn how to propagate yeast and make for a healthy fermentation. And that was the golden key to making really good home brews that I thought could be um, offered commercially, um, and that had been one of my goals, is to produce or to create to be part of the American craft brewing industry since early days of my homebrewing time in the early 80s.
That strikes me so much. As I am growing up in Belgium, you don't think about it like what's special about Belgian beer because that's what we were drinking. We were not even thinking that it was special. Um, but then you went into the East, and I think that's a interesting one. It's also something I wouldn't think about right away. Just because it's so out front in our face that we don't think about. If you want to brew a beer, you get the yeast from a brewery and you brew a beer. But yeah, that was very early on, 1980, as you mentioned. So it's something, yeah, very early in the craft brewing movement, or maybe not existing at that point.
Yes, in the 80s, there were just a handful of craft breweries. We had the likes of Sierra Nevada Brewing Company and Boulder Beer. Um, Boulder's no longer with us, and a few others in California that started up. Those were pioneers. Anchor Brewing, certainly one of them, would mention, and Mendocino, no, New Albion Brewing Company. They're the first, probably, um, craft brewery to start from homebrew
To
roots.
California mostly.
Yes, in Mendocino.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember that I had problems sourcing microbiology when we started working on what became La Folie. But how did you get the yeast then? Because that was even so much earlier. I'm talking about 96 and you're talking about 1980.
Yes, well, it, there's most Belgian beers are bottle conditioned, and as are most homebrew beers are bottle conditioned, meaning there's a second fermentation in the bottle that creates natural carbonation, and which unavoidably leaves a bit of yeast in the bottle, which a
And
creative,
that was the source.
crafty brewer can propagate the yeast out of that bottle. So I did propagate yeast out of some Belgian beers too. And that was the key because there was no commercial availability that I knew of for yeast at that time.
I prep my yeast with a sugar solution, 10 gram per liter, and I put an egg in it. I boiled the whole thing and added the yeast to it. How did you do that?
The egg and the boiling milk. Just pulling my.
No, I'm actually, that was for Drew. I just added an egg for all the nutrients, and that was just to prepare the yeast just before
Okay.
brewing.
Well, all we knew in the homebrew world at that time was the propagator worked, and it would be okay to use some canned Malteurop just to get the sugar. And it's essentially the same, a sugar solution. And
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, we didn't know that much about yeast nutrients at the time, or I didn't. And um, hopefully, some of those nutrients came along with the packaged malt syrup. And it tended to work. And the aeration, getting the oxygen into that wort and yeast solution before, right at the beginning, was really critical to getting the healthy yeast.
Yeah, for me, I was just like preparing the yeast that I got from a brewery
Yeah.
because and just park it for overnight to get it as a starter almost, not really to propagate itself because
Yes.
you were started with a bottle,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
with some drench on it.
Yes. I was starting with just a tiny little lifting a tiny little colony off of a propagation plate.
And were those bottles that you brought back from Belgium, or were they
Yes, they were. I bought them in
something
Belgium and
fresh?
carried them back in my suitcase.
Yeah, because that would be if you buy something here, it could be often old, and the yeast could be pretty damaged or dead by then.
Yes.
When we go into the prop, I'm gonna build in a small break here. Uh, we have a message coming up, and then we come right back to this conversation with Jeff Lebesch.
Blue butterfly flower has been used for centuries in Southeast Asian cultures to add bright blues, pinks, and purples to foods and teas. Now, brewers and distillers have joined in, using this flavorless flower to infuse new colors into familiar drinks. Ready to make your brews pop with fresh color? Talk with the team at First Tea, and they'll help you find the best way to use blue butterfly and other teas for your next project. Email info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA.com. Malteurop Malting Company is based in North America, specializing in growing and producing quality malts for the craft beer and distilling industries. With local farms and malt houses spread across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, MMC's commitment to excellence is fully ingrained into every batch it produces, ensuring breweries and distilleries of any size can create the finest beverages on the planet. Visit malteuropemaltingco.com to learn how Malt Europe can support your malting needs. Or you can contact them at customer success at malteurope.com or call 844-546-MALT for questions or to place your order. Malt Europe, premium grains from field to flavor. This episode is also sponsored by Stomp Stickers, one of our favorite partners when it comes to printed brewery products. Stomp Stickers is a reliable resource for printed items such as beer labels and boxes, keg collars, coasters, and more. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.
Welcome back. This is Peter Bouckaert, brewmaster or owner from Purpose Brewing and Cellars. And I'm interviewing Jeff Lebesch, the guy who started New Belgium Brewing Company. We talked a little bit about very early on the getting as a home brewer in 1980, so very early, sourcing yeast and coming up with recipes, sourcing raw materials as such. I want to move on a little bit towards starting up a brewery. And because where did the idea come from? Why did you wanted to start a brewery?
Where did the idea come from? I think when I first started homebrewing, I had access to the American Homebrewers Association magazine called Zymergy, and they talked about some startup craft breweries, then known as microbreweries in California, and the one in Boulder that I mentioned earlier. And I thought that sounds like a really cool industry. I would love to be part of it. And so I kept it in my mind for a long time. Somewhere in '82, I think I had a little sabbatical from my engineering job and interned at Cernavada and River City Brewing Company in Sacramento to see what this was all about. And I came away from that knowing, oh boy, I need to know a lot more about business and a lot more about brewing and have a lot more money. So I stuck with the day job, but I did keep it in the back of my mind. And then a number of years later, as I thought my homebrew was of a saleable, marketable quality, and when I was married then to Kim Jordan, we made a second proposal to her to start this brewery, and she had never thought, what the heck are we even doing starting a beer business? But she was game and very excited, and we decided to go for it. So I thought I had the pieces, the business knowledge, and a little bit of money, and the brewing experience to give it a go. So
I'm always surprised to see here in our town, even still quite some home brewers who want to move into this business. I think this story is still fascinating. It's very fascinating for them, and I think we want to hear some more about the very early on days. And this is, of course, a different time frame. Equipment and so on can be easier found, I would guess. But still, I think there's probably some jewels in there for homebrewers who want to move to follow your path, basically.
okay, well that was we conventional wisdom then it would take $500,000 in 1990 money to start a brewery, and we had nowhere near that. But again, my passion for making things, I thought I think I can design a brewery and put it in the basement of our house and make this work. And so um, I came up with a design of 5 hectoliter, 4.25 barrel brew house from 2 fermenters uh, aimed at Belgian style beers only. So it was only bottle conditioned, and I largely built that brewery myself. I had help with welding on the stainless steel, but I had to come up with every aspect of it and all the vessel design and everything myself.
Is it homebrewers who design square fermenters, or why did he come up with a square fermenter?
Well, why are the most of the vessels square? They're square because it takes up less floor space, and we had such a tiny basement to work with. It gave us better floor space efficiency. The only round vessel is the kettle, and because we could whip that up using the canoe paddle into a whirlpool and get the true pile to center out, settle out in the center.
That's how I still do it at Purpose Brewing right now. We have a pump, but the pump is not powerful enough. There's really there's a chapter about building the brewery in a basement, and there's some pictures of those square fermenters. There's also some other pictures from the brewery very early on, page 155 to 160, about it. Um, so yeah, you designed it, but still, then somebody had to make it.
Well, the stainless vessels were built by a sheet metal shop, but after that, I built everything. I ran all the plumbing, did all the wiring, built custom electric immersion heaters for the kettle, built a special pump for that worked through even both in the brew house and for bottling. It was a um, positive displacement pump that we could run a certain number of rotation cycles, and that would fill up bottles and shut itself off.
So it was a gravity filler at that point.
No, that was pumped.
Okay.
Later, the second generation was a gravity.
So you pumped it up in the gravity filler, no?
At the second brewery, we had the gravity filler.
Okay.
This was strictly pumped at the basement brewery.
Okay. Wow. Right away into the bottle.
Yes, right out of the fermenter through a rough cotton filter to get the hop bits out.
But then, and we're talking here 91. Um, I joined New Belgium in 96, and at that point we were around 30,000 or something barrels. So this is incredible fast, 5 years. And this doesn't take a normal person to go from a basement, 5 hectoliter, or basically a 4 barrel brewery, into 96. We were at a 120 hectoliter brew house, and or 100 barrel for American listeners, brewery. So what happened there?
It was a great time to be in beer business in Colorado. The growth spurt in craft brewing on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California, had happened a few years earlier, and it was migrating to Colorado. And suddenly there was a great knowledge about craft beers, micro beers
in Colorado,
growing at that time. And so it was just a good time to be in business here. And so there were a handful of other craft breweries started up about the same time, and we were buddies on the technological front and got together and do things. And we had our own separate little territories, but as we grew and our territories overlapped, things changed somewhat. But it was for us, it was a matter of how much we could sell everything we could produce. And so how fast could we build up capacity? And the Colorado market was just soaking it up. It was like I said, a great time to be in business in Colorado. We did expand to a couple other states during that time, but it was really all Colorado growth.
So it was, but still, then you mentioned some a good camaraderie. I'm looking there's somewhere a picture from Michael Jackson visiting the brewery and Doug Odell, like the brewers from Fort Collins were visiting also, but I don't find it here right away. or is it not in there?
Oh goodness. I think
Yeah.
yeah, so we yes, had a great relationship with the other two other breweries that were in town at the time we started, Adele's Brewing and Coopersmith's Brewery and Pub. And we always got together and did things. And Michael Jackson did pass through Fort Collins once on his regular tours to see what was going on in American beer business, and all of the Fort Collins brewers came along for that. So we have a picture of him outside the second brewery and along with all the other brewers in town.
I think this is still very relevant for people that want to start up a brewery. And the people that know, the people that can help you are next to you or close to you. And I hope that American craft brewing and other craft brewers can keep on the spirit up from going further. But still, the only thing I hear you saying about going in 5 years to 30,000 barrels and then maybe I don't know what I would use as a time frame, 20 years later being around 800,000 barrels. Um, you say location because you mentioned Colorado.
Hmm. I think location was important in the first couple of years, the Colorado stuff, and then after that, it really relied upon our presentation in the market, the labels. Our number one brand at that time, Fat Tire, was a quirky name and a delicious beer that people really enjoyed and got very excited about. And so, in the later years, it was quality of the beer and the presentation that was very important for that growth. And of course, maintaining the quality is essential, and maintaining the volume. We couldn't shortchange any distributors that's out of state, or they might drop us. And if we ever shipped one batch of bad beer, um, that would be the death knell for any brewery. And it's a lie to say that we never produced any bad beer, but we worked pretty hard to never let that out the door.
Yeah, and it kind of struck me in '96 when I came the first time over that Fat Tire was the main beer, was an amber ale, was very Belgian at that point. I think 12% of the market was amber ales in Belgium, with Palm, De Koning, Opwijk. There were quite a bit of brewers doing that. Unique part for you, we had Willem van Herwe from Palm once visiting shortly after I came, and I had some Palm and the Koning, and we put Fat Tire, three blind beers next to each other, and the only remark he had is like, "Why is this one dry hopped?"
Why is that one dry out?
Yeah, he was so struck that like a Belgian amber ale was dry hopped, but basically he didn't know that Palm and the Koning were in the set.
Okay.
So he was really struck about that being a fantastic beer. Um, how a home brewer in 1980 came up with a beer that was such a match with Belgian beer, and it's fantastic to see. I mean,
Oh, good. Well, thank you, Peter. It was a lot of um, it was a lot of fun developing that beer, and it wasn't meant to perfectly mimic Belgian amber beer, but to fit in with that style. And the dry hopping, that was my addition totally. I thought I like that, and makes for a more interesting beer, and
mhm, I agree.
why not?
Yeah. What struck me also in '96 coming over, there was already open book management. At that point, a month after we arrived, we had a meeting here in the mountains, not that far from here, Red Feather, I think it was, and that Kim and you were saying basically, hey, we're gonna distribute 1% of the company to the over the to the employees. You guys come up on how you're gonna do this. For me, as a I came in for brewing, wasn't expecting something like this. Um, but it goes back really to who New Belgium is, or yeah, I'm going to stay with is. Why? How did you go
Why?
into such a direction very early on?
How did we get into such an employee focused, human focused business? That was truly all Kim's passion. Um, Me, like Peter, we're all about brewing and making the machine produce more and better beer. And Kim came at it from a different viewpoint. Her background being in social work and understanding how important the human element is in creating success, whether that's in business or general life. And so it was very important to her to bring these human elements into the company culture. And I totally credit that for an essential part of the image and the growth and the power of the company is that we had this employee. Uh, it started off as profit sharing, as Peter mentioned, the 1% thing, and then it grew into employee stock ownership, and everybody felt empowered to do their best and to make suggestions how to make the company better at being a stockholder and an owner of the company where they work. That was a fantastic, very important cultural element to the company.
To this day, everybody that works there a year gets a bike, and there's after 5 years, and they maintain that now, even with Bells and the brewery in Virginia, people get to go to Belgium. Um, you came with us. So Frizy, my wife, and I are still organizing the Belgian trip for New Belgium. And we asked Jeff, hey, would you mind or would you be interested in coming once with us? You want to talk a little bit about that one?
What?
And the bike and
The bike, yeah. But I think I should quick go over why the bike is so important. And I mean, the book is named after a bike, and um, mountain biking has been one of my passions since also in the 80s. And I did a mountain bike tour in Europe, and that was actually the inspiration for Fat Tire Beer because I had taken a mountain bike on this tour and decided and came home and started brewing a beer at home, named it after the tour, which was Fat Tire being a nickname for mountain bikes. And that was just a homebrew then, and it existed as only a homebrew for 6 years until we started the company. And so a bike features prominently on the Fat Tire beer label, and it really became a core element of the company culture. Um, Not the only core element, and not the only core beer element. There's also a Belgian beer component that happened a slightly different time frame. But the story of the beer being created on the bike and segues into why the company logo features a bike and why the company gives away bikes to employees. It's really um, the bicycle image creates a feeling of nostalgia and easy times, and it's an easy sort of thing to remember, and it became an important marketing element for the company that we didn't realize in the early years, but it is
Mhm.
that's important. So the second bit about the Belgian beer culture, a different tour when I finally went deep in Belgium on the Belgian beers, how fantastically varied and high quality and special those beers were that just were not available in the American beer market at the time. Um, in particular, the one great experience I had at the bar in Bruges Biertje, described in the book, and the that experience is actually recreated on this 5-year tour that has been going on since about 1996, I think, or 97.
It was earlier,
Yeah.
94 or something. You guys went twice without me.
Yeah. Okay.
Or yeah, maybe 95.
And then from the time I left the company in 2009 until recently, I had not been on that tour, even though it still went. Peter and Freezy um, always helped organize it and still do. And they invited me to go along on the trip again this year, which was really fantastic. I hadn't been back to that bar in a number of years and was able to sit in my favorite bar stool and give the story along with 50 New Belgium co-workers at the time. It was fantastic, fantastic experience.
But there was a fantastic element in there that you didn't touch on. If you, meantime, maybe you have Googled the book Born on a Bike. Um, and you can see on the front page there's a bike, Jeff in the mountains, Argentine Pass or something it
Yeah.
is. And that bike, so that's a picture from when?
1986. And the
86.
bike is a 1984 stump jumper sport.
So how is that now, that bike now related to Lebesch?
Oh, okay. So I still have that bike. Doesn't get ridden much, but actually, um, on Peter's suggestion, I took it to Belgium on the trip this year, and we rode it around, and I got to revisit Brewers and get some pictures of us in front of the bar now, me with my white hair, but it's still the same bar, the same bike. It was really
Yeah, that was
fun.
a fantastic ride. We biked from Gent to Brugge, mainly following a canal. It was a beautiful day, and the sun was out. And then we biked until Brusbeertje. Brusbeertje was closed. We knew that, but okay. Um, that day, we went back later. It was a fantastic experience to do this. Um, is there anything you would like to add?
Wow. Well, it's been fun to see the continued growth of New Belgium, and very happy to have been part of that all those years, and especially excited to be part of it again at some level, not in any sort of financial way, but culturally, I like to hang out with people that are still there, and I have close connection with a lot of them, and to continue to do these beer tours, and even what's this very special, I think, even with the ownership of New Belgium transitioning to corporate entity um, in 2019, they allowed the culture that had existed before that to be maintained. And so the culture of New Belgium, even though the founders are no longer associated with the company, it is still there, and that's really very exciting and most heartwarming for me to see. And I'm sure Kim's pretty excited that the culture has persisted as well.
Yeah, for Jeff and I, who both left New Belgium, it's kind of interesting to see from the outside in now how we live in Forcon still. So for us, it's an easy walk here to go to New Belgium, and it's great to see that a lot of the core elements of the culture have been maintained. Of course, things change; things always change, especially in a growing brewery. But um, it still is very similar, and so it's fun that you are willing to um, come out to Breast Beach because otherwise I have to pretend I'm you and kind of recreate the um, the roots really
Yeah.
of New Belgium and it's or the inspiration and because I think you talk in the book also about your first time in Breast Beach and how crucial it was
Yes.
for the starting of New Belgium.
Yeah, that was important time, and and I totally agree how great it is to see the company still growing. Company has to change. Any modern company that wants to stay connected with their market has to grow and change to some extent as the market grows and change. But their essential parts are still there, and it's great to see.
Well, Jeff, thanks for this conversation. I'm really honored to have a conversation with the guy who won in 2011, 2012, the San Francisco Solo Hawaii sailing. um, one of Jeff's passions along the way. I still want to repeat here the reason why I wanted to interview Jeff was because of the book he just wrote that came out, Born on a Bike, a personal history of the origins of the early years of New Belgium Brewing Company, that you can find on Amazon just typing in Born on a Bike. Jeff will be back in the next episode of this show as a host, having a conversation with a brewer of his choosing. So we'll see who that becomes. That will be on air in a couple of weeks. So make sure that you tune in for that. A reminder, visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media to support journalism in the beer space, who's kind of important if you hear Jeff talking about his early days, how publications around beer are really important. Check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. I'm Peter Bouckaert of Purpose Brewing, and thank you for listening to the Brewer to Brewer podcast.
First Tea is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. First Tea invites you to explore the rich and versatile world of teas and botanicals, including blue butterfly flower. Email info@firsttea.com to find out more. That's FIRSDTEA.com. Malteurop Malting Company is based in North America, specializing in growing and producing quality malts for the craft beer and distilling industries. With local farms and malt houses spread across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, MMC's commitment to excellence is fully ingrained into every batch it produces, ensuring breweries and distilleries of any size can create the finest beverages on the planet. Visit malteuropmaltingco.com to learn how Malteurop can support your malting needs. Or you can contact them at customersuccess@malteurop.com or call 844-546-MALT for questions or to place your order. Malteurop, premium grains from field to flavor. Today's episode was also sponsored by our friends at Stomp Stickers. Stomp is a proud member of the Brewers Association that produces a wide variety of printed brewery products, such as beer labels, keg collars, coasters, beer boxes, and much more. Stomp's website features an easy-to-use design tool, low quantity orders, fast turnaround times, and free domestic shipping. Visit stompstickers.com and use code BREWER for 15% off of your first order.